We know that getting local in terms of impacts enhances the chances of people acting, especially when they have a group with which they identify and think of being part of the group which is affected, which is going to act together, and so on. So, social innovation then comes down to getting personal and going local. Foster a global culture of climate action through coordinated public communication and education at local to global scales. So there has to be some link to the outside world, sometimes for transferable solutions. So some other group may have tried something somewhere else that applies to you as well. So you can have a clearinghouse of information of local actions that are applicable around. Combine technology and policy solutions with innovative approaches to changing social attitudes and behavior. This is, of course, about incentivizing the use of, let's say, cleaner stoves, changing bulbs, and whatever else, right? Doing greening of the neighborhood. You can think of many things. We also need innovative and ethical social technologies. Innovative and ethical social technologies to change attitudes, norms, and behaviors regarding climate change and how to tackle it. So this ethical thread is to be carried throughout. So a novel solution to a social problem that is more effective, efficient, sustainable, or just than existing solutions, and for which the value created accrues primarily to society as a whole rather than private individuals. Okay, this is what social innovation is defined as by these groups from Stanford Social Innovation Review that was written as Rediscovering Social Innovation. This is from USC, actually maybe business school. This is talking about social innovation process. They have an animation on this website you can look at. Basically it talks about how many iterations are needed. So the idea is to co-produce something, so you don't do something in the lab and go to the community and say, here is something, try it. You start by a dialogue saying what is the problem that you're trying to solve, and then you co-produce it to meet that requirement, and you innovate to do a pilot implementation, a pilot instrument, a pilot solution, or whatever. And you learn from the feedback. So there is a good feedback process, and from the pilot solution you innovate to scale it. Okay, let's say solar stoves were tried in one village, 5,000 households, and then how do you expand it? You have to scale it by innovating, and then you again learn both back to the pilot solution level and all the way back to co-producing a better, more suitable solution, if you will. And from the scale you have to innovate to diffuse the information. So the idea is, let's say Project Surya wants to try 5,000 households and then wants to go to 50,000 or 5 million. Okay, so there again you have to go all the way back to feeding to the co-production process, so that the solution is completely adoptable and is sustainable. Okay, so in that context you have to also understand what is the global geographic pattern of climate change perception. You have the global culture of cooperation, which we talked about in terms of Paris Agreement, but Paris Agreement is made at the national government levels, and then the ratification process has to be internal, which has faced a lot of problems in the US, for example, and so on. And this graphic shows something really interesting. So this is looking for awareness and concern. Okay, so darker shading shows countries where respondents were more aware of or concerned, and light gray shades indicate where the countries didn't have any data, like these countries in Africa here, and I think this is Burma over here, and part of New Guinea. Okay, and Greenland, of course. So this is just awareness of climate change. You can see that in the US, for example, awareness is very high, more than 75%, whereas a country like India, the awareness is somewhere in the range of less than 40%, 30 to 39%. But of these people who are aware, if you look at people who think climate change is a serious threat, US is surprisingly very low. It's in the range of, I don't know, 50 to 70%. Okay, so high awareness, but not all of them are aware that or accept that climate change is a serious threat. Whereas of the less than 40% that are aware in India, the number of people who are accepting that this is a serious threat is more than 90%. Okay, there are details. It depends on how the questions are posed and what wording is used and so on. So there is nice studies by Yale 360 on those things you can look up. The other thing that matters is, of course, how social norms and our groups affect our social beliefs and beliefs about others. So under social beliefs, it depends a lot on what we believe about others. So there are social norms which are property of a reference group. So it could be your community, your village, could be your religious group, could be your language group, and so on. And then you typically look for what is typical of this group in terms of their beliefs, their practices, their response to new information or new technology, outside information, and so on. Oftentimes it depends on the source of the information. That's where credibility, legitimacy, and salience come in. Who you trust. Do you trust government? Do you trust private industries? And so on. Farmers, for example, tend to trust the government more than the private industries when they are trying to buy new seeds or new fertilizer and so on. What is appropriate? So you think of the group dynamic to see what would be the appropriate expectation. What is the expectation of an appropriate response or behavior? In non-social beliefs, personal beliefs are obviously much more important. Then it depends on the property of an individual. So it's the attitudes, factual beliefs, and moral beliefs. So your own personal moral beliefs can be important. So these social constructs, which social norms are basically social constructs, right? They have value, they influence our beliefs and action because oftentimes they involve shared resources and community coexistence, cultural practices, celebrating together, making relations, and so on and so forth. But the context of going local and getting personal basically means that you have to understand the social dynamics in which the information is being diffused about climate action, climate impacts, and so on.